Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Attorney General. Let me first apologize for not being here for your testimony. Unfortunately, I'm chairing a subcommittee in another committee and had to be there for a hearing that we had scheduled before we found out you were going to testify, so accept my apologies, please. In the prior hearings, Mr. Attorney General, I've been devoting some time to trying to figure out what happened with the firing of John McKay. And on April 19, you told the Senate that you had accepted the recommendation to fire Mr. McKay because he had shown bad judgment in pushing an information sharing system and in speaking to the press about the department, about department resources. You remember that testimony?
Yes, I hope, though, that I said that the concern was not that he was pushing for the information sharing system, but the manner in which he pushed it. Okay.
Well, that really doesn't have much relevance to the next set of things I want to ask you about. Whatever he was pushing or not pushing occurred in the summer of 2006. The letter on the information system you discussed in the Senate was dated August 30, 2006, it turns out, and Mr. McKay's comments to the press were reflected in an email on September 22, 2006, and unfortunately, we now have evidence that documentation, in fact, that Mr. McKay was already targeted for removal by Mr. Sampson in March of 2005 because the documents show that he was already on the list. So are you aware of any legitimate reason that John McKay should have been forced out as a U.S. attorney in March of 2005 as opposed to the things you talked about that occurred in 2006?
I would have to go back and look at that, Congressman. Again, what I recall is that when I accepted the recommendations, I was not surprised to see Mr. McKay included because I was aware of concerns in the way that he pushed this information sharing project. Again, I applaud his efforts in that he was doing his job.
Okay, Mr. Attorney General, I understand what you're saying. You've got to go back and look, but there's been some suggestion, unfortunately, our investigators asked Kyle Simpson and he said that he remembered department officials being upset that Mr. McKay had pushed for action regarding the department's investigation of the murder of Thomas Wales, and there was some concern that he was being overly aggressive in pursuing the people who had murdered Thomas Wales, so a lot of people are viewing this as being admirable, not something that somebody should be fired for. Would you agree with that?
That is certainly, it wasn't in my mind a reason why I accepted the recommendation, and I was not aware of this specific concerns within the department until very recently. So I don't know why, if that was a reason why he was included as part of the recommended group. That's something you'd have to ask others involved in this process. I have not had the opportunity to do that.
And if that was among the reasons, would you agree with Mr. Kay, who has characterized this as, I'm going to quote exactly what he says, the idea that I was pushing too hard to investigate the assassination of a federal prosecutor is mind-numbing, close quote. If it's true, it's just immoral, and if it's false, then the idea that the Department of Justice would use the death of Tom Wales to cover up what they did is just unconscionable. Would you agree with that it would be immoral and unconscionable for you all to be firing somebody because they were investigating the death of one of their own staff people?
That's a crime, and we have an obligation to of course, to investigate and prosecute those responsible for it. I'm not aware that the department, however, is using that as a reason or excuse, a basis.
Well, you obviously haven't listened to the testimony of some of the people in the department then, because that was an excuse that was advanced initially. And that's the problem here, Mr. Attorney General. There are so many different excuses advanced at different times whenever it's convenient that you have this appearance that there is something else there. And in this case, Mr. McKay also failed to aggressively or as aggressively prosecute as some people thought he ought to prosecute and pursue some voting fraud cases that were taking place after an election took place. And it might have had some impact on a Democrat versus a Republican being elected. Is that concern that the public is concerned about, Mr. Attorney General? If that's at the bottom of this, that would be an improper motivation for a termination and would be illegal. Wouldn't you agree?
I agree that if, in fact, there was pressure put on Mr. McKay to investigate a case which didn't warrant an investigation, but obviously there may be circumstances where an investigation may have been warranted, and so we'd have to look at the circumstances of a particular case. I don't recall that when I made when I accepted the recommendation, Congressman, that was a reason for it, is his efforts with respect to voter fraud. But clearly, going back and looking at the documents and the correspondence, there was a great deal of concern about his efforts with respect to voter fraud, because I received a number of letters from groups and outside parties.
So you didn't fire him for that reason, but somebody might have put him on the list for that reason. That's really what you're saying, Mr. Attorney General.
I don't, again, Congressman, I'm assuming that this committee has spoken with everyone who provided input, and of course the person who was compiling the information, Mr. Sampson, and would know better than I, because I'm a fact witness and I haven't talked to these other fact witnesses about what happened here.
Mr.